Ladies and gentlemen, we're flying a tight formation here with two of the greatest women in aviation. Miss B. Haydu, right here on my right. She was an original World War II WASP. We're going to talk extensively about that. And on her right is United States Air Force Major Caroline Jensen. Welcome, Caroline. Have a seat, lady. Well, welcome to Oshkosh again, B. You've been here several times, and it's been my honor to do 2 or 3 of these programs with you, but welcome back. Just turn it on and wait. 3 seconds.
It's on.
Yeah. That's good.
I can fly them.
Nope. It's on. And just hold it real close.
I can fly an airplane, but I can't fly a microphone.
Caroline, as you can see, is one of the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds, and she's the right wing number 3 position. We're going to talk about the Thunderbirds, but mainly we're going to talk about the difference of the way things are done nowadays and the way they were done back in 1942. B, tell us what the WASP did, who they were, where you trained.
The WASP were formed to relieve men for active duty. We were initially started by Jacqueline Cochran, who's decided that it would be a good idea to train women the same as men. She'd been trying since 1938 to convince General Arnold that the women should be trained. She wasn't successful until towards the end of 1942, when he was really getting desperate for pilots. Her idea was we should do every job in the United States that there was. And what a lot of people don't realize is that for every combat pilot, you need at least 12 service pilots. So we were stationed eventually at 120 different airports, doing all the jobs that were done in the United States. We towed targets, we towed gliders. I personally did engineering test flying and utility pilot. We flew at night so that the beacons could practice finding an aircraft. We flew gunners so they had practice in shooting from a moving aircraft. In other words, every job, and there were about 22 different jobs, were done by the women. I like to think that we were extremely helpful at a time of need.
Yes, you were, and you flew everything in the inventory, from B-17s to P-51s to Corsairs, you name it, they flew it.
Including the B-29.
Including the B-29. And Jackie Cochran, for those of you that are not familiar with that name, was a pioneer woman aviator. She flew everything that they had in the Air Force, actually set a bunch of speed records in an F-104, and a real character, too, wasn't she, B?
Oh, yes, she was. She was very determined. She really wanted the women to be able to do everything. And she proved that they could. You know, as most of you know, an airplane knows no sex.
No, it doesn't. You know, I have the opportunity to train a lot of pilots with the airline I was with, and I would do that to a new captain, especially a female captain. I said, you know what? Airplanes don't care what color you are or what your gender is. They don't care, and you'll be just as dead as anybody else if you don't do the right thing. Contrasted, Caroline, with your training nowadays, and by the way, she gave me permission to call her by first name, Major. Would you please contrast it with your training and how things were different when you went through school, pilot training?
Well, I definitely think that I have B and the other WASP to thank that when I went through my training and while I flew in combat and flew in fighters, I was a pilot, not a female pilot. So I didn't really feel any different now that I'm a Thunderbird and the third female Thunderbird to fly in the demonstration. I get a little more attention for that, but before that it was just kind of another characteristic of who I was. I have brown eyes and I'm a female, and I can fly an airplane just as well as anybody else in my squadron.
Well, I tell you what, I was an Air Force pilot myself, and I can attest to how hard the training is because I was the only guy in my class that did not have a college degree. And the first day on base, a colonel called me in charge called me up, and he said, "Lieutenant Boland, you might as well go home." And I said, "Why is that, sir?" He said, "You're the only guy in your class that doesn't have a college degree, and this course is too hard. You'll never make it." So when I finished first in my class in flying and number 10 in academics, I went back to see the colonel and I said, "Sir, thank you." He said, "For what?" I said, "For the incentive." Anyway, Caroline, I know for a fact that every Air Force fighter pilot worth his or her salt would love to be a Thunderbird, and you didn't get chosen just because you're a woman. So tell me how that process goes about.
I think it's early winter, they solicit applications from the entire Air Force. So to come into the team, at the time I was selected, you needed at least 1,000 hours of fighter type time. And then you go and you find 5 commanders that you used to work for. Hopefully they're generals, and they would love to write you a letter of recommendation, tell everybody what a great pilot and officer you are. You write, you take all of your flight evaluations, so everything you've ever done from the time you're a lieutenant till present day. They look through any downgrade or hopefully not downgrades that you had in your record. And then you have to actually have a full-length photo of yourself so they show you know how to wear your uniform properly. It's a good thing. So we started out with about 40 people who apply, and then they narrowed that down to 12. And those 12 people will go on the road to an air show. And it's usually about a week into the team's travel season. So you go to an air show and you see everything from the C-130 or whatever aircraft they have being downloaded. There's 120 people on the team. We usually travel with about 60. And to see the team get everything off the cargo and where it needs to be within about 45 minutes is a pretty awe-inspiring thing. And then you see the Thunderbirds fly over and do the arrival, and you go through that and you see everything, Make-A-Wish, hospital visits, school visits, the air shows themselves, the autograph line afterwards, and you do that for about 3 days worth, plus 2 days before and a couple afterwards. They take those 12, narrow it down to 6. Those 6 do everything all over again a month later, and then it takes a couple months from that to narrow it down to the final 2 or 3, depending on the year, who's going to fly in the demonstration. So it's a pretty long, drawn-out process. They give you plenty of time to crack if you can't handle the stress of the sun and all the people around you. But it's a great process, and it's a lot of fun. I feel really honored to get to represent not only the current people in the Air Force, nearly 700,000, but also represent my heritage, like women pilots and other veterans and people who've gone before me.
Wow, from what I just heard, I think the Air Force did a pretty damn good job of picking you.
Thanks.
Our situation might have been a bit different, that is, as far as being accepted into training was concerned, because there were 25,000 women that actually applied, and only 2,080 were accepted, and out of that, 1,074 actually graduated the program. However, we were allowed to have up to a high school education. College was not required, and I was one of the fortunate ones who was accepted, even though I only had a high school education. But
I tell you what, last year we had 8 Tuskegee Airmen up here, and we talked about the prejudice that they went through in their training, of course, down in Tuskegee, Alabama back in the 40s. It was not very conducive to being very pleasurable for a black person. But B, did you encounter any type of prejudice going through training from any of the instructors?
well, I always made sure in training, because we wore men's coveralls, which we dubbed zoot suits, and I always made sure that I had goodies in the pockets of the coveralls to hand out before we went flying. So I guess that helped. But there was some prejudice. However, we were told, we were given quite a handbook before we started training of the things that we could or could not do. And it specifically said, if there is a personality clash between you and your instructor, do not hesitate to ask for another instructor. I was very fortunate. I had excellent instructors. And so personally, during training and even afterward, I did not encounter. However, there were some who did, and I'll give you an example. Some women after graduation were sent to a B-26 school to be checked out in the B-26. But when they arrived, the officer that was going to check them out said, "I'm not teaching any damn women how to fly." Well, it was an order. He had to teach the damn women how to fly. However, one of the women got even with him. She married him. True story.
Caroline, I know how proud I was when my mom pinned on my silver wings in Big Spring, Texas in 1968. I know that's a proud moment for any aviator, but tell us about that. How'd you feel?
Mine was a proud moment. It involved my dad, and my dad is one of the reasons that I'm sitting here, and I decided for a career to be in military aviation. He flew helicopters in Vietnam, and he was in the Marine Corps, and he always pushed me to achieve my goal. And when I first decided I wanted to be a Thunderbird, women weren't allowed in combat aviation. And, I told that to my dad. I was like, well, I want to be a fighter pilot. And he actually went out and bought a book about the WASP and gave that to me to tell me, see, they can fly. They flew everything there was. So he always encouraged me. And then the day that I graduated from pilot training, he was there, and he pinned my wings on me. So it was really special and important to me to honor him and his service and carry on.
B, when you got out of training, you finished up on a T6? What airplane did you finish up and get your wings on?
Well, we had cross country in the AT-6 and the PT-17. And there it is, right behind me. I flew that.
She flew this very
that
airplane right here. We're going to talk with the owners about that in a few minutes. But this airplane was at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas in 1944 when Bay went through pilot training. And she has flown this very airplane sitting right here on the ramp at Oshkosh this morning. We'll talk about that in a few minutes.
But the last phase of training, the first phase was about 70 hours in the Stearman. And that in itself was quite a jump because I had been flying 65 horsepower side-by-side Taylorcraft. And then we came to Sweetwater and Avenger Field, and we were flying 220 horsepower PT-17s. Well, it was towards the end of 1943 when they decided that they would see if they could eliminate one of the phases of training to speed up the training. And so they chose the elimination of the BT-13 because, as most of you know, you went from a primary trainer to a basic trainer to an advanced trainer. So they wanted to eliminate the BT-13. So we went from the Stearman 220 horsepower directly into the AT-6, 650 horsepower. And that was quite a jump. But as far as cross-country is concerned, we had to fly in the Stearman on cross-country as well as the AT-6. And I had a very wise instructor. He said, now, when you're flying in that PT-17 and you go to turn your charts, they could easily fly out, but don't panic. What you do is you look for a railroad track. You follow that railroad track. You'll come to a town. You land. You go to the base and say, I need charts. My charts flew out, and continue on. But be very careful. Fly way to the right of that railroad track because you're almost certain to meet a Navy pilot coming the other way.
There has always been a rivalry, sometimes not so gentle rivalry, between the Air Force and the Navy about who has the best pilots. Well, I'll just say this. As an Air Force pilot, anybody that can land on a pitching carrier deck at night in all kinds of weather has certainly got my respect. And the Navy and the Air Force have completely different missions, and they're both very good at what they do. So my hat's off to all you naval aviators out there. By the way, how many veterans in the audience? How many veterans? Raise your hands. God bless you. God bless y'all. I don't know if Connie's still here. Connie Boland, you still here? I'd like to introduce my sister-in-law, Connie Boland. Come on, Connie, say a word. Connie is the founder and chairman of Warbirds in Review, this program. I especially wanted her to come up today. We're talking about women in aviation, and she was the first woman in my life in aviation. She came up through the ranks flying civilian airplanes to flying, well, I'll let her tell you a little bit about it, but she's a wonderful person, and she's the reason why we're here today. Connie Bola.
Thank you, Danny. Danny said, I'd like to introduce you, and I said, that's fine, introduce me. This is the ladies' program, but I don't want to talk. So what's he do? Thank you very much. It's your program. Okay, I give them free rein with the program. I'd like to thank the ladies for being here today, and especially B. You were an inspiration. B. Haydu and the other WASP made it possible for me to continue with my career in aviation, whether it was a noticeable contribution or whether it was just the fact that they not only proved that women could fly airplanes, but they are a classy group of ladies. So I have attempted to live up to not only your piloting skills, but the fact that you are ladies. So thank you very much.
If I can
Thank you, Connie.
intercede, we have some more WASPs here, and I'd like them to stand up and wave to you.
You done with me?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ladies. Thank you for coming today. I want to pay tribute to Connie. She works so hard putting these programs together and getting people from all over the world here. Last year, I interviewed Nguyen Hong Mi and the fellow that shot him down over North Vietnam in 1972, General Dan Cherry. And Hong Mi came all the way from Hanoi here last year, and it was a fascinating tale. You can pick up that book, My Enemy, My Friend, over here in the Warbird merchandise area. It's an uplifting book. Let's talk more about how the Thunderbirds are doing now with the sequester.
That's my favorite topic.
How you staying current?
We did a lot of things during our off time. We did our last flight on the 5th of April, and until just recently. So you guys might have heard we recently got some more funding from Congress, and we were able to get 140 flight hours for the Thunderbirds to resume flying, not demonstrations, but just those basic things that all pilots need to know, like flying instruments, landings, emergency landings, going back down to low altitude. So I've flew one time in a Thunderbird aircraft since the 5th of April, right before I came out here. But we've used that time to do a lot of things. When you're a Thunderbird, when you guys think about the Thunderbirds, you probably think about 6 jets in the air. And when you're on the team, that demonstration is about 5% of what we do, and the rest of it is going out into communities and meeting people, going to hospitals, doing Make-A-Wish, going into the schools. So we did a lot of that in the Las Vegas area because we weren't able to travel outside of that due to funding. So we did that, and then a lot of people went back to school. I took 3 master's classes, and there's quite a few guys who are working on their bachelor's, other people on their master's, and other degrees. So we have definitely made the most of our time. We still don't know what next season's going to bring, so that's still up in the air, but we're hoping for good news, and we're definitely going to be ready for it.
Thank you. I know I'm hopping back and forth here, 70 years difference, but I want you to get the contrast of what things were like then for B and what they're like today with Caroline. B, when you got out of flight school and you decided that you were going to, which airplane did you decide you really wanted to fly is my question.
Well, I always liked the twin engine, and I was stationed at Pecos, Texas, where I flew the UC-78, the AT-17. Those are advanced twin-engine aircraft with lots of nicknames like Double-Breasted Cub, Bamboo Bomber, Woodpecker's Delight, because it had wooden wings. And I was doing, as I said, engineering test flying and also utility pilot. I liked cross-country. I wanted to be chosen for the Ferry Command, but at that juncture, they had enough in the Ferry Command, so I was in the training command. I flew and our base became a B-25 base January 1st, 45, but we were disbanded December 20th, 44. So I didn't get to fly the B-25, but I always kind of wanted to fly the multi-engine aircraft. I liked them. And of course, after training, after we were disbanded, most of us, I'm sure, were extremely disappointed. And I wanted to be able to continue flying, so I started writing letters to manufacturers and airlines, and never heard no said in so many different ways. So I realized I was going to have to do it on my own. So I went back to New Jersey and got my instructor's rating and did freelance instructing and did freelance ferrying of aircraft, because they were ferrying a lot of aircraft from the southern states up to the northern states where you could buy them extremely cheap. I've forgotten now the price of P-51s, but everyone would shudder if they could hear that. Then that led to my having a ferrying business, ferrying the new aircraft that were being manufactured for people, which in turn led to my getting a Cessna dealership. And they had a wonderful commission set up. The first fiscal year, first 10, you got 10%. The next 5, you got 15% retroactive. And the next 5, you got 20% retroactive. So you better be sure I sold 20 airplanes in 1 year, even though I had to buy the last 2 myself. But I got that 20%. And I used that to become part owner of a flight school. And it was in there that I met my husband, who was a steerman instructor for 3.5 years in World War II. And he could make that airplane stand up and say woof. He was a great pilot, wonderful guy, and I'm sorry that I lost him in '06. But we had a wonderful life together. We both flew up to our late 70s. We owned about 14 different aircraft and just had fun flying.
I tell you what, I've lost so many friends up here at Oshkosh, hopping from one fighter to another, or doing crazy stuff they shouldn't be doing. So my question to you, B, is how in the world are you still alive today, flying one airplane in the morning, another type airplane in the afternoon? And how the heck do you do that?
Blindfolded.
No, I'm serious. That's a skill, to be able to hop into one airplane after flying another one that morning and be able to, operate efficiently and safely.
You have to know your airplane.
Yes.
That's for sure. I mean, if you're going to be foolish enough to take an airplane up and try to second guess it, you're in for trouble. So it's something you just do.
I interviewed Dawn Seymour up here, one of you guys, compadres, and Dawn is a rather tall lady. She's probably 5'10" or so. And when I was talking about flying the B-17, I fly for EAA, I said, I'm 6 feet, and sometimes I need every bit of that rudder pedal, so how in the world did little women fly B-17s in World War II? She said, of course, we had the seat as far forward as we could. It had extra seat cushions, and one lady said she had some articulating clamps to put on the brakes on the rudder pedals so they were a foot longer. So she'd slip her shoes up under those straps on those articulating plates, and she had much more rudder that way. I thought that was pretty cool. That's right. Let's go back. All right, you got your wings, and which airplane did you pick out of flight school?
I actually chose to stay and fly the T-38. Like B, my husband's in aviation as well. We graduated from the Air Force Academy, got married that day, and went through pilot training together. We went to Korea together. but our first assignment was in Del Rio, Texas at Laughlin Air Force Base flying T-38s. And I think they make airplanes smaller these days because I was able to reach everything. I'm 5'8", so, and same thing in the F-16. Once I got to that, it actually felt a little bit claustrophobic, like things are pretty close the first time you get in. But then once you start the engines and take off, you kind of feel like Wonder Woman in her invisible jet. Everything kind of goes away and you just see what you need to see and get all that information. But I love them both, but I really enjoyed the T-38 flying, and the F-16 is a great platform for demonstrations.
I soloed the T-38 January the 1st, 1968. My instructor stepped out and he said, "No, stay there." And I said, "What?" And you were supposed to have, I forget, let's say 10 takeoffs, and 10, periods before the solo you and I had about 7 or 8. And he says, "Stay there." And he said, "Take it around 3 times. And I was startled. I said, "Sir, I'm not ready." And he said, if I thought you were not ready, do you think I'd let you take a multi-million-dollar airplane out for a spin? That's as scared as I've ever been in my life. I had no idea what I was doing.
I remember the first time I soloed I flew gliders first and I had soloed it, but the first time I soloed a Cessna, I remember taxiing out, my feet are holding the brakes, and my legs are shaking, and the same thing happened the T-37. I won't tell who my instructor was, but I'd kind of messed something up. He said, "Never tell anybody you did this." He's like, "You're ready to go, you're good." And same thing, we land, you shut down one engine, he hops out, and I will never forget, he grabs my name tag, takes his wings off, and puts them on my chest, and he says, "You can't fly without wings," and so you got my wings up there. Wow. And my legs were still shaking when I was holding the brakes, but it went awesome.
B, which airplane did you solo in first time?
Side-by-side 65 horsepower tailcraft.
Wow.
No electric starter. You had to pull the prop through. And in those days, before you soloed, you had to be able to get it into a spin and out of a spin before you were even allowed to solo. But during training in the PT-17, we used to have spot landings. So what they do is they, put a line here and then a line over there, and you're supposed to land on it. And again, I had a very smart instructor, because when you pull back on the throttle on the Stearman, sometimes it goes sput, 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 so it needs a little jazz. So he said, if you see you're a little bit low, don't forget to jazz up that engine a little bit, because you don't want it to conk out while you're taught us how to cheat.
What's the best attribute of a good instructor? What's his best attribute, do you think?
I guess having faith in you. Now I have heard that when the male instructors with the male pilots, I don't know that we ever had any like that, they were very harsh, and they would take the stick and waggle it back and forth and hurt the poor student in the back, not realizing that the guy's really trying. I mean, he doesn't want to fail. And I think just being gentle and just telling you what you're supposed to do and waiting for you to do it. And some people take a little bit longer than others.
Right.
So just be patient. So that's a good instructor, not somebody that's going to wang your legs.
What do you think, Carol?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's learning to know how your student learns. I had 1,000 hours flying T-38s and pilot training on 2 separate assignments. So there's some guys that you have to yell at. There's some guys that you have to speak calmly to. Some guys and gals that you have to give them a demonstration, and some will just be able to take your words and to execute what you tell them to do. So it's in a couple rides, the fewest rides, you can figure out how that student will best learn, whether it's berating or praising. That's how they're going to learn the quickest.
My instructor was Captain Dave Bittenbinder, 6'5", half Cherokee Indian, half German. One of the greatest guys I ever met. Later got killed in Vietnam, but anyway, I'm going through training, and I was having a hard time with instruments. I couldn't get it. I just hadn't put it all together with the flight director and all that in T-38. And Dave, being a real quiet guy, he didn't say much. And he said, today we're going out, we're going to do an instrument ride. And this is what you're going to do. You're going to do a GCA, you're going to do an ILS, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And I'm not going to say a word. He said, I don't care how bad you screw up. Go to the next maneuver, and I will not say a word. I said, yes, sir. And we did. We flew everything. I did the best I could. He just sat back there and watched. And we come in final, and we pitched out, and we did the normal traffic pattern. And you had to repeat your final down 3 green, pressure and quantities normal, approach speed is 165 or whatever it was. You had to repeat that, whether you were solo or dual. And I did. I pitched out, came around, down 3 green, pressure quantity normals, approach speed is 162. And I just about get ready to flare. Dave goes, click, dumbass. And I look at everything looks good, and I go around. Now I pitch out again, I ask him, Captain Bittenbinder. He wouldn't answer. So I did the whole pattern, came around, down 3 green, pressure quantities normal, approach speed's 158. I just about get ready to land, click, dumbass. I go around again. Now I don't have enough fuel to go around the 3rd time. So I said, Captain Bittenbinder, what did I forget? He said, check the 0 delay lanyard on your parachute. I had forgot to hook it up below 10,000 feet. I'd never miss that again. That's a good instructor. Patience.
I thought you forgot the gear. I thought you forgot the gear.
No. Listen, we're up here today with this beautiful aircraft that belongs to, let me get my notes here to make sure I get names right. It belongs to Andy and Mike Porter, and they are here. Andy, Mike, come on up if you would. Now, this airplane was actually flown by me, as we said, at Sweetwater, Texas, at Avenger Field. Now, this guy talks kind of funny. He's even worse than me with my southern accent. He talks really funny. But go ahead, tell us about the airplane, how you got it and everything.
Okay, good. Yeah, we first saw this Stearman. It was white, had a black and red stripe running down the side. It was in a ride business back in New Jersey. And Mike and I actually got hired by the ride business to fly up to the Statue of Liberty, World Trade Center, the Intrepid, cross over Jersey side, fly back to the statue, Verrazano Bridge. It was a wonderful ride, took about an hour. Michael loaded thousands of flights in this and other biplanes and a T6 in the ride business. Finally, in 1997, the airplane came up for sale. Well, we knew that it was going to need a lot of work and restoration. Nobody knew its history. Nobody really cared. It had just been used as a working airplane. So Mike went ahead and got the history from the Smithsonian and the Air Force. And lo and behold, to our absolute pleasure, we discovered that it was a WASP airplane at Avenger Field, and that lit our fire. We had been enthusiasts of the WASP, but now we had a WASP airplane. We spent the next 10 years collecting parts. Pretty much everything from the rudder to the front end. I mean, it just needed restoration. During that time, Michael had grown from being 12 years old to 16. He soloed this airplane on his 16th birthday in New Jersey.
In February.
Yeah, in February. So anyhow, 2007, we've got all the parts put together, and we decide we're going to do the restoration. So Mikey gets a razor blade and down the side, away we go. Put it back exactly as it was at Avenger Field. We've got pictures here of the airplane at Avenger Field. Actually, prior to being at Avenger Field, it was at Union City, Tennessee, which I believe you're very familiar with, Dan. It's your
My first chief pilot at the airline went through flight training at Union City, Tennessee, and my family farm is at Martin, Tennessee. It's been in my family since 1836.
Great. Well, then number 12 flew over your head.
Many times flew over my farm.
You
Many
probably
times.
cursed it. Yeah. Anyhow, So we started the restoration. That's when Michael really started to earn his stripes. He was in A&P school at the age of 16 to 18, having got his high school diploma at 16. He went to Naval Air Engineering School, Lakehurst, New Jersey, the Hindenburg Hangar. That's where he got his A&P school. 3 years later, he got his IA inspection authorization. The Dallas FISDO at that time told us he was the youngest IA in the country. 12 years later, he's running a restoration business. He's got 4,000 hours, 2,800 hours in a Stearman. Actually, just one point I'd like to say. Both these wonderful ladies have flown in WASP number 12. Mikey, you tell how Major Caroline flew.
Well, the story starts out at Sun and Fun last year, and I found out about Carolyn flying with the Thunderbirds, and I know about the WASP history, and I knew that she would like to know about it a little bit more with this aircraft and its background. So I come up to her and say, here's my aircraft, come take a look at it, and if the opportunity ever arose at another show, maybe I could get you up in the airplane. And there was a little bit of red tape to go through, but at the Indianapolis Air Show, we were able to make that happen, and we had a great flight. What did you think?
It's pretty awesome. I like flying, whether you're at, how many knots?
Oh, about 90.
90 knots or 450 knots. So the thing turns on a dime. It was pretty awesome. I really enjoyed it. And it was really sentimental to me too, sitting there thinking about the WASP there in that same seat, learning how to fly and land and turn and navigate 70 years ago, and I was wearing my Thunderbird uniform thinking how proud that they would be of what they had started and where it ended up and where it's going.
Absolutely.
Sitting in the audience are two of my friends, Cliff Walker and Dick Spear, both captains with Northwest Airlines. Raise your hands, guys. I was trying to think of the first female pilot we had at the airline, Charlotte Wall. Charlotte Wall was the very first female pilot we had. The little old Southern Airways I started with back in 1969. That was the first female airline pilot I had ever seen. And when I retired 10 years ago from Northwest, my last check ride was given by a real petite 5'4" check airman on the 747-400. So that's how far we've come. There were no Air Force pilots when I got my wings, none whatsoever. What's the percentage now, do you know?
I do. Actually, I got to go to Sweetwater a couple months ago for the homecoming for the WASP and talk to him, and I researched it. And as B said, there were 1,074 women who earned their silver wings, and the 2012 stats was 1,119 women are currently flying. That was as of 2012. So it's roughly 20% of the Air Force are women today, and about 4.5% of pilots are women. And as far as women who fly in the fighter community between all the services, it's roughly about 100 women that have the opportunity to do that now.
All right, I'm going to go down the line here, and I want each of you to give me your last thought about what this airplane means to you, what your piloting experiences mean to you here at Oshkosh. And then I'm going to ask you one last question. And I'm going to ask you that question now, let you be thinking about it. But if the good Lord says you can have one more flight, which airplane is it going to be and why? Okay, so let's start down here on the end. What does bringing your airplane to Oshkosh and meeting people like Bee and Caroline mean to you?
I had intended to say this earlier, but I'd like to thank EAA, Warbirds of America, Scott's Miracle Grow, Connie Boland, everybody involved with this incredible presentation area. We've been here, well, it's fourth time number 12's been here. And it's just an incredibly exciting experience. People are wonderful, very friendly. If I had to fly one last flight, I'd have Mikey fly me. In fact, I'd like, when my ashes don't let's get morbid. Have him toss me out. Number 12.
Well, for me, bringing this airplane to Oshkosh is about keeping the history alive. These ladies don't get enough credit, in my opinion. They prove, not only for women, but everybody in general out here, if you have something you want to do, a dream, a goal, whatever it is, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Develop the skill, keep your feet firmly planted on the ground, and go for it. Absolutely 100%. That airplane, when we bought it, I had a lot of people saying you would never get it to this level. They said, take a can of gasoline and put a match to it. There it is. We're keeping it alive, and I intend to keep doing that. That's what it means to me. So, and I want to say thank you to both of you and everybody here. Well, that's what it is for me. And last flight probably would be in the Stearman for me. I mean, that airplane's going home to me. So.
Caroline?
That's a difficult question. I know, I guess I would go back to where I started, flying gliders off of a tow plane, and you get up there and it's just silent and calm and gliding, and I don't know, I really enjoyed that. So that's kind of where I started, but whatever I'm doing, I'll have the WASP patch with me, like I carry all the time, to honor my heritage. So thank you.
B, sum it up for us.
The question was about the Stearman.
The first question is, what does all this mean to you all these years later to come up here and associate with people like Caroline, and your legacy has been passed down today, I think.
Well, I want to say one thing about the Stearman. That is the best airplane to learn to fly in. And the best instruction that you can get in any aircraft is the military. They are just wonderful. And as far as what airplane would I like to fly on my last flight, I better say the Stearman. My husband might be listening.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for that. For me, every year as a historian for EAA and coming up here and meeting all these wonderful people every year, what a payoff. Because of Connie and my brother Ed and being involved with EAA and Warbirds of America, I have met Tex Hill, General Robin Olds, General Gunther Rawl, numerous Bud Anderson, Jack Roush, numerous people come year in, year out, and now some of those people are gone. But I got to sit down with them, have a beer with them, have dinner with them, and talk with them about aviation. So for me, if I had one last flight, but I'm really confused now because I want to fly with you one time, Caroline, in that F-16, and you're probably scared the hell out of me, but I'd love to do that. But my last flight would be in a Cub also, and it would be with the airspeed indicator not working, and it would be with the doors open late in the afternoon in the fall, looking at deer on the ground. And the Cub's about to stall because the door comes up. And when the door comes up, you better be close to the ground because you're about to hit it. Anyway, this Warbirds in Review is number 4. We got 13 this week, so check back tomorrow. I've got the schedule right here. I'm going to promote B's book. B, I'm going to promote your book. B, just wait a minute. I've got to promote the bomb first. The bomb over there is for donations. We got a slit cut in it. When you walk by there, stick a couple of bucks in there for the Warbirds of America, and we try to keep this program going with donations. All this equipment and everything is not cheap. And now, I'm going to promote B's book, Letters Home, 1944-1945, Women Airforce Service Pilots by Bernice B. Falk Haydu, right here. Bernice B. Falk Haydu.
And the profits go towards all of the different museums that need money, they always need money. So I donate the profits to worthy organizations.
B's going to be over in the Warbird merchandise area after this program signing her book. I'm going to get my copy signed right now, and aren't you jealous? Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching Warbirds in Review.
She was a former beautician who left the hair business for the air business. She was the first woman to win the Los Angeles to Cleveland Bendix race, and the first person, male or female, to fly the route nonstop. When the Germans invaded Poland, she asked First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt to help her get permission to train women to fly combat support. In 1943, she established the Women Airforce Service Pilots, the WASPs, to ferry aircraft from the United States to the front. After the war, she set a new speed record for propeller-driven craft, and in 1953 became the first woman to break the sound barrier. In 1964, she capped her career by setting one last record, taking the F-104 Starfighter to 1,429 miles an hour. She was Jackie Cochran, and she is a legend of air power. No one knows exactly when Jackie Cochran was born or even where. But in 1906, give or take a year, the woman who would become one of the greatest female aviators of the 20th century was born Bessie Mae Pittman somewhere in Florida. She was raised by foster parents, and though she didn't have shoes until she was 8 years old, she seemed instilled with a belief in her own destiny.
She, in many ways during that time, invented a life for herself. She would spend a lot of time alone. She would spend a lot of time dreaming about what she was going to do.
She learned how to style hair, and by the time she was 16, was something of an expert at the emerging technology of the permanent wave. She moved around a lot, and when time and space didn't put enough distance between her and her upbringing, she picked a new name out of the phone book, Cochran.
When she felt like she had exhausted her potential in Florida, she packed up her bags and went to New York City, where she got a job at a very high-end salon called Antoine's. And it was there that she really began to expand her horizons by meeting a variety of wealthy people, people whose lives were dramatically different than anything she had known before.
She arrived in New York in 1929, just in time for the stock market crash. No matter, it was the big city, and she was part of a world she had barely imagined. And the unemployed in the street did little to dampen her enthusiasm.
She became such a favorite of many of the society ladies that they would ask her to travel with them to Miami when they wintered over. And so she would travel to Miami with them and do their hair down there, and frequently she was invited to dinners and parties.
A real-life Cinderella, Cochran met her prince at one of those parties, Floyd Odlum. A self-made millionaire, Odlum was bored with society chit-chat, and when seated next to Cochran was instantly impressed that her conversation surged past the normal gossip and on to bigger things.
She opened up and told him all her hopes and dreams and ambitions and bubbled over with enthusiasm. Well, this caught Floyd's attention, and he was mesmerized by her. And it wasn't a case where this was an older man looking at a younger woman saying, "Oh, I'm going to make something of you." This was a fellow who said, "Wow, this is a gal that's going somewhere," and decided that he wanted to be a part of that and play a role in it.
He was impressed with her, and what he did when they got married, he helped her out in every endeavor that she wanted to attend, whether it's flying or business or anything like that. And he sort of used Jackie as a hobby.
Unaware of his wealth, she explained her plans of starting a cosmetics company. Odlum listened and suggested that the only way to oversee such a broad enterprise would be to get a pilot's license and fly from place to place. Within a few hours of meeting Jackie Cochran, Floyd Odlum had given her an idea that would change her life and the history of aviation. She learned to fly in 1932 in New York and then went west to learn more. She befriended a group of Navy pilots who taught her the Navy way.
There's no such thing as a natural-born pilot, because all pilots start out with the same level of visual acuity, hand-eye coordination, things like that. And what happened is the guy with the most experience, or gal, is the best. That's simple. And she had a lot of experience flying airplanes as a WASP during World War II, ferrying them from the factory to the operational units.
She thought of herself as a slow learner and struggled with basic flight maneuvers. But she persisted, and when she needed help, she didn't hesitate to track down the right person and ask.
I think Jackie had that undefinable something that so many pilots seem to have. And it's a combination of wanderlust and determination and a need for a little bit of glory and to kind of set yourself ahead of the pack. And probably for Jackie, that came as a result of her childhood.
In the 1930s, the place to be for an aviator who wanted to make her mark was in the private sector. The Navy and Army Air Force were starved for funding, flying outdated aircraft, confined to workaday missions like flying mail. But in the private sector, things were different. The 1930s were a time of excitement, of big money air racing and flying circuses. Jackie Cochran was part of that world. She barnstormed around the country, competing in air races and putting on exhibitions, always setting her sights on the next great challenge. She set dozens of world records, in the process befriending the elite of aviation, including Jack Northrop, Amelia Earhart, and Howard Hughes. In 1934, only 2 years after receiving her pilot's license, she became the first woman to compete in the Los Angeles to Cleveland race for the Bendix Trophy. In 1937, she came in third, and in 1938, she won what was then the biggest annual air race in the world. At the same time, she founded and operated Jackie Cochran Cosmetics. With her husband Floyd's help, but always under her own power, she kept tight control of her company.
Now, certainly marrying a millionaire helps you to achieve probably more quickly than the old-fashioned way, but she had already established herself as a go-getter. And indeed, what attracted Floyd Odlum to her was the fact that she was a go-getter.
He sponsored just about everything she wanted to do, and she was her own business lady when she set up Jacqueline Cochran Cosmetics and was an agent for Nina Ricci perfume, dresses, and things like that from Paris. Floyd let her run her own business, but he would help her, you know, like setting records required a great deal of support, both financially and, you know, business-wise. And so he was involved in them, and he helped her, I'd say, probably a great deal.
She oversaw the lab that developed the products, flew from city to city, selling her line to upscale department stores. When she arrived somewhere, she always took time before getting out of the cockpit to spruce up her makeup. Nominated to the committee that annually awarded the Collier Trophy for the greatest contribution for aviation, she advocated giving the award to medical doctors researching the effects of high-altitude flight. The trophy had always gone to pilots or aircraft designers, but Cochran succeeded in getting scientific research recognized. She then lobbied President Roosevelt, who for the first time committed government money to the research that led to the development of G-suits, pressurized aircraft, and oxygen masks. By 1940, aviation had become a more serious business. The Germans had rearmed and taken Austria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and France. The British were under fire. The head of the British Ferry Command asked Cochran if she would fly a Hudson bomber from Canada to England to draw attention to the company's resupply efforts. She jumped at the chance, and despite sabotage of her aircraft and enemy fire, got safely across the Atlantic. She arrived in time to witness the Blitz and to watch London burn under the Luftwaffe onslaught. She returned to the United States with a plan to develop female pilots to help ferry aircraft, freeing male pilots for combat duty. The British were doing just that, and the program was clearly successful. She met with President Roosevelt, who seemed interested, and appealed to his wife Eleanor for help. She worked her way down the chain of command, always with lukewarm endorsements that gave her hope, if not confidence, that the plan would be adopted. She met with Hap Arnold, who said he'd get back to her, and with General Robert Olds, commander of the American Ferry Command. Olds was himself considering hiring women pilots on a contract basis, But Cochran wanted the pilots to be full members of the military, not just hired civilians. When she pressed her point, Arnold said no. The time for that had not come, but suggested she return to England and study the British experiment in female aviation. A month before Pearl Harbor, Cochran left the United States. She and 25 other American women set out to prove they could do what was, in the United States, a man's job. She was commissioned a flight captain in the British Air Transport Auxiliary and went to work setting up her American Volunteer Corps as the Germans bombed London. They ferried Spitfires and Hurricanes from factory to field, and during their 18 months of flying up to 5 flights a day, only one pilot died. In 1942, Arnold came to London and asked Cochran to return to the United States. Desperate for pilots, he asked her to set up the women's command she had advocated. It took her a month to put her British affairs in order and return home. She returned to find that Olds had been doing what she had not been allowed to do.
Well, she hit the roof when she got back and discovered that something had been done in her absence that was not based on her blueprint. So she went to every office in Washington that would open its door and let them know what she thought of it.
She was a very aggressive gal, and basically when she wanted to do something, she did it. You didn't want to get between her and it.
Arnold offered to shut the women's air ferrying service down, but Cochran convinced him to wait. She needed time, she said, to study the situation and figure out the best course of action. In September, she went to work in Arnold's office. Her job was to train as many female pilots as she could, so that those pilots could take over non-combat roles, freeing experienced male pilots for combat duty. Word leaked to the media that the famous Jackie Cochran was setting up a flight school for women. In a matter of weeks, before she had a field, planes, quarters, or trainers, she had 25,000 applicants. In August 1943, she was named director of the Women's Airforce Service Pilots, the WASPs. Her embryonic training program merged with the existing Women's Ferry Pilots program, and while not technically a part of the military, it seemed as though Cochran was well on the way to getting women into the Army Air Force. She set up operations in Texas, eventually moving to an abandoned facility near Sweetwater. Before she left, Arnold called General Barton Yount, the commander of the Fort Worth Training Command. "Barton," Arnold shouted into the phone, "Jackie Cochran will be down there in a few days, and I want her to have everything she wants." Jackie Cochran arrived in Texas in late 1943 to start training her female pilots. Almost as soon as word of her program got out, she found herself in a fight for her political life. Several powerful members of Congress didn't think it right that women were training to fly military aircraft. They argued that Cochran's WASPs were taking jobs from men with families to feed. It was an absurd claim in the middle of war-caused labor shortage, but it was a claim that resonated. In a nation still scarred by the Great Depression, members of Congress quickly lined up against Cochran. She also had another, perhaps more surprising adversary, Colonel Ovida Culp Hobby. The commander of the Women's Army Corps, Hobby assumed that if the WASP became part of the military rather than a women's auxiliary, they would come under her command. While Cochran wanted the WASP to be part of the Army Air Force, she would have none of Ovida Culp Hobby as her commander. Part of that was personal animosity. She referred to Hobby as the woman I love to hate. But among flyers at the time was also a general belief that aviation was not well understood by the Army as a whole. It was a given that the Army Air Force would, after the war, spin off into its own service. Why, Cochran reasoned, allow the WASP to be absorbed into the regular Army when they would just be made independent after the war? The result was an uncomfortable compromise. Cochran retained control, but the WASP stayed civilian. Hobby made sure that the WASP remained obviously non-military. They weren't issued uniforms, for example, and when Cochran complained, Hobby saw to it that they got only Women's Army Corps coveralls. It was a not-so-subtle hint about who controlled women in the military. and a reminder that the WASPs were mere civilians.
Jackie Cochran was not a mild, meek person. She had a steamroller personality. If she wanted something, she absolutely let everybody know she wanted it and how she expected to get it.
Cochran, of course, was not without resources. She had a WASP uniform designed at the exclusive Bergdorf Goodman department store in New York, and then convinced Arnold to pay to have them mass-produced.
In terms of the WASPs, she was absolutely unwilling to let anybody play a role that was the opposite of what she had envisioned for this group. So she went in and fought her way into a position of authority and then kicked into the training and really conducted the entire organization as a military operation.
Their performance record was magnificent. They shuttled thousands of aircraft around the country, freeing hundreds of male pilots for combat duty. They handled the most difficult planes, demonstrating that women could fly temperamental, physically demanding aircraft, and compiled accident records that compared favorably with men's. She believed wholeheartedly that she was making progress, and in December 1944, Congress gave her her reward. They ordered the WASP disbanded. The women, Congress decided, should go back to their place. Not only would the WASP not be absorbed into the military, they would not be allowed to continue flying as they already had, no matter how successful they had been. The more than 1,000 pilots the WASPs had trained in less than a year were given their walking papers.
I was at the, I think, 25th anniversary of the disbandment of the WASP, which occurred in 1944. And this is later, I'm up at Edward. So I came down, she said, would you come down and give a talk to the WASP about current, kind of flying and airplanes and technology. So I did, and I met probably there's about 400 of them down there, and they were really, really classy gals. I'd never met too many of them. But see, there were so few of them that were able to continue flying after they were disbanded, that probably not over a half a dozen that I knew that kept on flying. Jackie was one of them.
Jackie served out the remainder of the war as a consultant to Hap Arnold. Working as a magazine correspondent, she was the first American woman to enter Japan after the end of the war. At the end of 1945, the president signed an order awarding her the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest honor. The president, she was told, was looking forward to pinning the award on her. She said in response that the only person she'd accept it from would be Hap Arnold. If he couldn't do it, they could mail it to her. You don't refuse the president, Arnold told her aghast. Well, I did, Cochran answered. And in a Pentagon conference room, Arnold gave her the medal. Cochran went back to racing. She bought a surplus P-51 and entered the 1946 Bendix, and came in second after a harrowing cross-country run that left her bruised and bloody. She ran the cosmetics business she had started in the 1930s between races and became a leading agitator for a separate Air Force. She spent thousands of her own dollars on advertisements pushing for an independent Air Force and raised more than 100,000 more to lobby and campaign. She used her fame and her husband, Floyd Odlum's connections, to open doors that might otherwise have been closed. And when the National Security Act of 1947 created an independent Air Force, she deserved much of the credit. 3 years later, the Harmon Trophy Selection Committee named Cochran the most outstanding woman aviator of the 1940s.
And then when she conned her way into Canadair, who her husband, Floyd Odlum, owned quite a bit, and they hired her as a test pilot. She said, I'm going to fly an F-86 and set some women's speed records, and men's too.
Flying a Canadian-built F-86 in 1953, she became the first woman to fly faster than the speed of sound. She became the first woman to fly a jet across the Atlantic in 1962. And on a single stunning flight from New Orleans to Hanover, Germany, she set 69 intercity, intercapital, and straight-line speed records. In 1963, she capped her career by flying a Lockheed Starfighter faster than any woman had ever flown before.
funny thing was, when Lockheed had a press conference down at Los Angeles International Airport, we took F-104 and I flew her wing down there. Well, when she landed, I went on around, was going on back to Edwards. I didn't want to get involved in the press conference. And I went over to the ground control frequency. I heard her check in with the ground control at Los Angeles International Airport. And then they called her and she didn't answer. And they called her again, she didn't answer. I said, if you look through your binoculars, you see she got her helmet off, combing her hair. And because she never got out of that airplane, that she didn't look like she stepped out of Vogue magazine.
Jackie and Chuck were extremely close. Jackie, in many ways, pushed and goaded Chuck to the point that he frequently threw his hands up and was going to walk away from her forever, but could never quite do it because she was a dynamic force and he was a dynamic force. And I think they both understood the magic of flight, the competitiveness of flight. They both had that element that you see in test pilots and fighter pilots.
In 1971, Jackie Cochran was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. In 1977, Congress passed a resolution recognizing the WASP contribution to the American war effort in World War II.
She set one heck of a lot of records in airplanes, and a lot of those records still stand. And I think she really made a big difference in women in aviation, which today there's thousands and thousands of gals that are flying in the military, airlines, private aviation, and she probably is largely responsible for their success.
In 1979, the members of the WASP began receiving their military discharge papers. It had taken some time, but Cochran had succeeded. She and her WASPs had indeed become a part of the military. She was born and raised in Elmira, New York, and spent high school admiring Amelia Earhart and the WASP pilots of World War II. In college, she earned her pilot's license and set her sights as high as outer space. She earned degrees in mathematics and space systems management, flew C-141s, and worked as a professor at the Air Force Academy. While attending the Air Force Test Pilot School, she learned of her selection as an astronaut, and in 1999 took off as the first woman to command a mission of the space shuttle.
As women become more and more involved in the aerospace industry, you get a longer progression of women making important advances, not simply for women, but for all of mankind. And it's wonderful to have somebody like Eileen Collins out there who is pushing the envelope, who is showing that women are capable of advancing America and technology and the world right alongside their male counterparts.
She is Eileen Collins, and she is a legend of air power. Eileen Marie Collins was born November 19, 1956 in Elmira, New York. She was the second of 4 children. Her parents split up when she was in grade school, and her family had to move into a government housing project. Collins' mother, Rose Marie, worked at a juvenile detention facility, and sometimes food stamps filled the gap between her earnings and the cost of raising 4 children.
When I was a child of age 7 through age 12, I went to summer camp, and the summer camp was close to a glider field. And as we were going through our outdoor camp activities, we'd watch the gliders fly overhead, and occasionally we'd go out to the glider field and watch them take off and land.
It only gradually dawned on Collins that she someday could be a pilot.
When Eileen Collins was a teenager, she began to get interested in reading about female pilots. She was particularly interested in Amelia Earhart. She was intensely interested in the WASP program. And what really fascinated her was the idea of women who were willing to put themselves in harm's way.
An exceptionally responsible and determined girl, she saved her money through high school until she had enough to take flying lessons.
Once I started taking flying lessons, I learned more about myself, that this is what I did well, this is what made me happy, flying in airplanes, but it was challenging. So I think that combination I was hooked.
She went to junior college and then to Syracuse University on an ROTC scholarship. She graduated with a degree in math and economics and a private pilot's license. She joined the Air Force as a computer design engineer who really wanted to fly.
The Air Force came to me and said, we have a new program. We're now taking women right out of college to go to pilot training. Would you like to volunteer? And I said, of course.
Her flight training was no different from the training of other pilots, she says. No harder and no easier.
It's difficult for everybody because of so much that is expected out of you. The studying, the operating in a very high-stress environment, flying with a helmet and a parachute, you're breathing off of an oxygen mask, you're out pulling G's and doing acrobatics, you have an instructor sitting next to you that you think his only goal in life is to wash you out of the program.
While she was in flight training, NASA selected its first women mission specialists. They trained, by coincidence, at Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma, where Collins was training.
I never got a chance to meet them, but I read the articles about them. I knew they were coming, and I thought, hey, I'm in pilot training right now. NASA's hiring women. That's what I want to do.
With her goal firmly in sight, she planned her career the way NASA plans a mission. She knew what she would have to do to meet the eligibility requirements, including 1,000 hours in high-performance jets and graduation from the test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base. She knew that she would have to be excellent at everything she did. Her first step was high-performance flight. At the time, women were not eligible to fly combat fighters, so she instead applied for and was assigned as a T-38 instructor. The T-38, while not technically a fighter, is a supersonic, high-performance jet. From T-38, she went on to fly and command C-141s. She found that she enjoyed the teamwork of being part of a large crew, that she enjoyed and was adept at command. She met and married Captain Pat Young, another C-141 pilot. She got a master's degree in operations research from Stanford and another in space systems management from Webster University. She taught math and was a T-41 instructor pilot at the Air Force Academy, and in 1990 entered the Air Force Test Pilot School. When she had all the right experience on her resume, she filled out an application for consideration as an astronaut. She did it quietly, telling few in the Air Force and no one in her family. She was at Edwards when she got the call. NASA veteran John Young asked her if she was still interested in being an astronaut. She said yes, and he invited her to the Johnson Space Center for astronaut candidate training. Collins was momentarily confused. Was this another part of the application process, or did it mean she was an astronaut? Young must have been smiling on the other end of the phone. Collins was indeed an astronaut.
It was just a really great day. But I didn't have that very happy, let's go out and celebrate feeling. It was more like it's kind of hard to describe. It was more like, hey, I finally made it. And I feel like I'm in a position now where I can really make a contribution to the space program, which is what I've always wanted to do.
The first thing that Eileen Collins learned when she reported for duty as an astronaut was, just because you're an astronaut, that doesn't mean you're going into space. Being an astronaut is like being at Disneyland. You spend a lot of time waiting in line or a relatively short ride. The crew flies. Everyone else pitches in. Collins served in a succession of roles, starting with orbiting engineering support. She helped get other astronauts in and out of the shuttle, ran communications between the ground and the shuttle crew, and helped with the final inspections of the spacecraft before flight. Collins' first flight assignment was the February 1995 flight of STS-63. Collins trained to pilot the craft. Flying a spacecraft is, of course, considerably different from flying a conventional airplane. Aircraft require nearly constant inputs, slight corrections, to keep the plane moving in the right direction. Orbital maneuvering is dependent on short, discrete thruster fires that have an effect only over time. Getting those burns right was critical on Collins' first mission, because two of the major tasks of STS-63 involved extensive maneuvering: a rendezvous with the Russian space station Mir, and the launch and retrieval of the Spartan 204, a small science satellite.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery on a mission to prepare for the next era of world cooperation in space.
Hello, program Houston. Roger, roll, Discovery. Houston is now controlling Discovery on its 20th trip to space. Discovery rolling on course for an orbit with the Mir space station. Mir currently half a world away above the Indian Ocean.
NASA goes into space for scientific research and to explore, and that's really our charter. That's what we do. But in that process, the individuals that carry out that policy, the astronauts, go through a very human experience that I think everybody changes, maybe some just a little bit and some more, but it's just an absolutely wonderful experience.
Collins' schedule aboard the shuttle was a busy one. She and Mission Commander James Weatherby spent the early part of the flight nudging the shuttle into different positions relative to the sun to heat certain parts of the craft in an effort to seal some tiny leaks in the shuttle's thrusters that might have prevented a close approach with Mir. The tactic worked. On the fourth day, she turned the shuttle to just the right attitude to deploy the Spartan satellite, all the while subtly correcting the shuttle's orbit to keep it moving closer and closer to the Mir. But in between her checklist items, she had some downtime. When she had a chance, she looked out the window of the shuttle and considered the experience she and the other astronauts were having.
There's nothing like looking at the Earth with your own eyes and just experiencing the feeling of literally flying. I'll put my face right up against the window so I can't see anything else, just the Earth. And I'll stretch out my arms. And it feels like you're a person by yourself just flying over the Earth.
She eased the space shuttle to within 30 feet of Mir without disturbing the fragile space station. She then backed off and flew a circle around it. It was all very by the book, and at the same time joyful in a way that the hyper-engineered world of NASA is seldom outwardly joyful.
Come here, Discovery. Discovery for Belocha. It's closer together. We are bringing our nations closer together. The next time we approach, we will shake your hand, and together we will lead our world into the next millennium. Jak my zbližili naši kosmičeské korably. Tak my zbližili naši naci sledující rád. Когда мы встретимся, мы поймем.
As you fly the shuttle around the Earth, you're going at 18,000 feet per second. It takes 90 minutes to go around the Earth. And in 90 minutes, I mean, how many billions of people do you fly over down there on the surface of the Earth? It's just mind-boggling.
6 days into the flight, she eased the shuttle into position to recover the Spartan satellite. The recovery went perfectly. She spent the last day of the flight preparing for landing, checking the flaps and controls just like any other pilot, getting everything in shape to come back down into the atmosphere and glide down to the Earth, just like the gliders she had watched from her summer camp. so many years before. The crew accomplished everything it set out to accomplish, and the pilot, a quiet girl who had surprised her friends and family by becoming an astronaut, flew a nearly perfect mission. She had improvised effectively when it was called for, and flown all her exacting maneuvers in exactly the way the mission plan required. She returned from outer space a proven astronaut. She also returned a changed human being. No one has ever come back from space and decided they'd never like to return to orbit. Eileen Collins was no different. And when she finished her first flight, she did what astronauts do. She got back in line for another mission. NASA expected that. What NASA did not expect was an astronaut walking in one day and announcing she was pregnant. Astronauts historically have not spent a lot of time pregnant. With a couple of classes of female astronauts, however, it was something NASA was having to get used to. And by all reports, NASA did pretty well with it. In 1996, Collins gave birth to a daughter. And then she went back to work at NASA, an astronaut and a mother.
I would say that being a mother and being an astronaut certainly is compatible. I'll never say it's easy, but I would say it's compatible and it's doable. And I think I have the two greatest jobs in the world, being a mom and being an astronaut.
Collins' second shuttle flight was STS-84. For NASA, the flight was significant because it was the 6th time the shuttle had docked with the Mir. For Collins, it was significant because she actually got to go aboard the space station.
I found Mir to be very warm. The temperature was warm, a little bit on the humid side, a little bit of a musty smell like a cellar, basement. But it was a very kind of a warm and happy place to be because the cosmonauts had it set up where they made us feel welcome. We had meals over there, they had music playing.
Once again, Collins executed her mission perfectly with no fuss and no problem. She returned to Earth and her family and then got back into line. This time, however, she knew she had the chance to make history. With 2 flights under her belt and all her career ducks in a row, she had the qualifications to do something no woman had ever done: command a shuttle mission. It made sense. Eileen Collins, who had quietly designed her Air Force career to get her into astronaut training, who applied to become an astronaut without telling her family what she was up to, who had completed 2 flawless shuttle missions without making a lot of noise about her own spectacular performance, became the first female shuttle commander. She shook a few hands and went back to work. The world outside, however, started making plans to mark a new milestone in gender equality.
People at work and friends and the media will ask me how I was treated, and I try not to ever think about how was I treated, because in the position I'm in as an astronaut, I have to think about how am I treating other people? How am I doing my job? How am I making the mission work?
As her launch date approached, the media presence around her built to a crush. NASA publicists fielded literally thousands of requests for interviews. And while Collins indulged as many as she could, her focus remained the mission and her crew.
As a shuttle commander, and this is true for all shuttle commanders, we are given a huge responsibility. Taking care of the $2 billion plus orbiter, your payload, which is, who knows what that costs, the space station, which you're going to go dock with, and many astronauts fly 4 months on the space station, you are given that responsibility by the American people. And they expect us to take care of, they're taxpayers, they're paying for the space program. So it is just very, very important that we stay so focused on the mission safety, success, get the mission done the way we have defined the mission to get done.
On July 22nd, 1999, STS-93 took off from Florida. The world was paying attention in a way it didn't usually with shuttle flights. The cargo bay was packed with hundreds of millions of dollars in experiments and satellites. One, nicknamed Chandra, was the most sophisticated X-ray observatory ever built, designed to look deep into the hot gas remnants of exploded stars and help scientists understand the origins and ultimate destiny of the universe. Mission specialists under Collins' command would test whether building the huge solar collectors necessary to power the International Space Station was possible, and determine if hobbyists could use ham radios to talk to orbiting astronauts. The mission was a big deal, except to Collins, for whom it was apparently no big deal at all.
Women at NASA are so integrated in the workforce that when you go to work on a day-to-day basis, you don't think about, am I working with a man or a woman? It just doesn't make any difference.
Up in space, Collins went about her job, walking around on her fingertips in zero gravity and making sure the checklist got done. She made decisions and did all her tests, made sure the pilot had everything ready for re-entry. And she took a moment every now and then to look out the window and imagine herself all alone, flying high above the earth. Far below and far behind her was the housing project where she had grown up. And as she flew, she picked up places below her that she would like to visit one day.
Someday, more and more people will have the opportunity to do that. Because after you go into space, you have a different appreciation of the Earth. You have a different outlook on the Earth. You don't, like when you drive to work in the morning, most people just think of, I'm coming from here, I'm going to here, and they think of their own little world that they live in. I don't do that anymore. I really don't. Flying in space has changed me. I have a very global outlook on things.
The first shuttle flight under the command of a woman landed perfectly, 5 days after it took off. The media crowded around, asking Collins what it felt like and whether she had had trouble with the men around her. She smiled and answered all their questions and then did what astronauts do when they get back from a mission. She got back in line to await her next flight.
I think her greatest contribution is the fact that she's very accessible. She's willing to talk about what she does. She's willing to talk about the achievements, the potential of the space program. She encourages not just young girls, but young girls and boys to dream big dreams and to go out there and work hard to make them happen.
She was working as a clerk at a Douglas aviation factory near Chicago when a test pilot invited her to go flying. Looking down over the city, she fell in love with flight. A year later, she heard that the legendary Jackie Cochran was coming to town to interview women interested in training to fly military aircraft. She applied, passed the physical, and endured the same training as any other flight cadet. As one of the WASP, the Women's Air Service Pilots, she flew 7 days a week through an intense political firestorm that swirled around her and her colleagues. The question was whether women had a place in military aviation, and her career and the career of hundreds of other WASP answered in the affirmative. She is Lorraine Zillner Rogers, and she is a legend of air power. Lorraine Zillner was born in Chicago on September 11, 1920. Her mother was a homemaker, her father an accountant. She was an active girl, always playing outside, and the only thing that seemed to bring her to a halt was an airplane passing overhead.
The planes from Chicago Municipal used to fly over the house, and when I'd be out in the yard gardening or doing any of those things outside, I'd hear them and look up, wonder where they were going, why. How did that plane stay up there? It was so big.
After graduating from the University of Illinois, she returned to Chicago and took a job with the Austin Company. which was building a new factory for Douglas Aviation on what would eventually become O'Hare Field. When the factory was complete, Zillner transferred to Douglas, and one day a test pilot asked her if she'd like to go up for a ride. She jumped at the chance and was, she knew, hooked on aviation.
So every weekend, I took my earnings and went right out to the local airport, little teeny 2x4 grass runways, and I spent my entire salary on lessons.
One day out on the flight line, she heard that the Army was starting a new program that would train female pilots to fly military aircraft.
The WASP program was the brainchild of aviatrix Jackie Cochran, who about 1939 came to the conclusion that a lot of people in the United States had, which was that ultimately America would be involved in the war in Europe.
Cochran grew up in poverty in Florida, founded a highly successful cosmetics firm, and learned to fly as a way of staying in touch with her far-flung businesses. She had become a famous air racer, breaking dozens of flight records.
She was a very generous lady, but I sort of classed her. She couldn't stand tranquility and complacency, like if you were at a dinner table of say 12 people and she was in charge. I don't think she could stand everybody being happy and joyful. She'd have to generate some explosion or something like that to kind of break it up, and that's the way she was. And she was a very aggressive gal, and basically when she wanted to do something, she did it. You didn't want to get between her and it.
Soon after winning the Bendix Trophy in 1938, Cochran formulated an idea for a military corps of women that would take over the non-combat flight roles that had always been reserved exclusively for men. Politically astute, Cochran took that idea to First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, explaining that the WASP, as they came to be known, would free up hundreds of male pilots for combat. Mrs. Roosevelt referred Cochran to General Hap Arnold, who suggested that she have a look at England's Air Transport Auxiliary, which used women to ferry airplanes around Great Britain. His suggestion was more political than heartfelt. He knew full well the firestorm that would result from letting female pilots into the Army Air Force and wanted nothing to do with it. Cochran, however, went ahead to England, saw how successful the British program was, and returned to the United States with a formal plan to create a branch of the Army Air Force for women. She wanted her group to be organized as military pilots, to be trained in strategy and tactics, and to take on more than just plain ferrying responsibilities. Arnold suggested instead that she put together a volunteer group of 25 American women to go to Great Britain and fly there. While Cochran was out of the country, the Army instituted an alternative plan to use women as pilots. The alternative had been put forward by Nancy Love, a polished former student at Vassar who'd married a Boston aircraft manufacturer. Love was an interesting counterpoint to Cochran. She was diplomatic, where Cochran was brash, and she was less concerned with creating a new women's branch of the Air Force than she was with just getting women flying. Her plan landed on the desk of the Ferrying Command, just as it was beginning its search for experienced pilots. And in September of 1942, the Army Air Force created the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, with 27 female pilots and Nancy Love as director. When Cochran returned from England, she quite predictably hit the ceiling.
Jackie's approach, both with the WASP program and personally, was to be very competitive, very driven. Nancy Love was a little more laid back, a little more refined, and their programs, I think, each reflected their respective personalities.
Cochran's personality dominated the decision-making process, and in the end, she got command of a new program, the Women's Airforce Service Pilots. When the smoke cleared, Nancy Love ended up working for Jackie Cochran. And so it was Jackie Cochran who arrived in Chicago to recruit female pilots to the war effort. And it was Jackie Cochran who met with the bright-eyed, fresh-faced Lorraine Zillner.
Well, I was in total awe of the woman because she was world famous, had broken every speed record. I mean, just unbelievable.
A month after meeting with Cochran, Zillner reported for her physical at Fort Sheridan outside Chicago. No one at Fort Sheridan had ever heard of a female pilot, and she spent much of the day showing her orders to disbelieving officers. When she finally reached the doctor's office, the medical staff seemed stymied. They'd never given an Army physical to a woman before and had no idea where to start. Lorraine Zillner and hundreds of other female pilots across the country were getting their first lesson about life and what it would be like in the Army. Sweetwater, Texas, where the Women's Air Force Service Pilots set up their training, was like most places where the Air Force conducts its training, dusty, isolated, almost forgotten. But in 1943, when Lorraine Zillner arrived at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, it seemed like the most exciting place in the world. She was surrounded by women like herself, pilots who were so thrilled by the opportunity that they were not discouraged when the Army required them to pay their own way to training.
Then we were assigned our flight gear, which was pathetic because we got all the hand-me-downs from the men. And my last name started with a Z, and I was always last in line, one of the shortest in the class, and I got a 48 long man's flight suit. The crotch came to my knees, and we all put these things on, and we were just, you know, it was unbelievable.
Together, the brand new WASP tightened their belts, rolled up their sleeves, and pulled and tucked themselves into their new uniforms. They were being paid $150 a month to fly, and that seemed like a pretty good deal, even if the Army was charging them $1.65 a day for room and board.
The women ranged in skill and knowledge very much the same way their male counterparts did. Some of them were extremely good and had a lifelong affiliation with aviation. Some of them had come into it fairly recently and were still developing the necessary skills and understanding of how aircraft worked.
Cochran knew that her WASP had to meet the same training standards as any other military pilots. But she also knew that if the WASP program itself was going to pass muster, her pilots had to be personally above reproach. She had chosen her group from more than 25,000 applicants and eventually brought more than 1,800 to Sweetwater. Those who were selected were chosen as much for their personal deportment as they were for their potential as pilots. Male pilots, Cochran knew, could drink and carouse all they wanted, but females had to behave themselves.
And she was very stern, strict. As a matter of fact, at Sweetwater, she was so strict with the rules and regulations that we called it Cochran's Convent. She really laid down the law as to what we could do and couldn't do.
Zillner loved the flying, and like the other WASP in training, wanted to do nothing to put the program at risk.
I always sang when I flew. I was happy up there. And I'd sing. I wouldn't dare sing anyplace else, but I was up there all alone. I could sing to my heart's content. And, it's wonderful.
She sang through basic, advanced, instrument, and night flight training. Down in the classroom, she studied the physics of flight, mathematics, meteorology, and Morse code. She learned to take apart, repair, and reassemble aircraft engines. After each segment of training, she was tested by regular Army check pilots, and she passed her tests with flying colors. She was just beginning to feel like a real pilot when, flying one afternoon out over the Texas prairie, she got into trouble.
Suddenly the plane just flipped over upside down and went into an inverted spin. I just didn't, I worked with it. I did everything that we had ever been taught. Nothing made any effect on the plane. And then when I looked out and saw how close I was getting to the ground, I knew I had to get out.
She struggled with the canopy, but managed to get herself out of the plane, barely feeling the thump as the plane's tail hit her leg. Her parachute opened perfectly, and she fluttered down to the ground.
So I'm laying there and I'm thinking, am I alive? Am I dead? Where am I? And suddenly I heard galloping of horses. And I thought, oh, I'm in Texas. Of course, I'm in Texas. And up come these horses, and two cowboys jumped off of their horses and came running over. And one of them unzipped my leather jacket and opened my tie, and the other one pulled my helmet off, and all my long hair fell down. And he said, "My gosh, it's a little girl."
One of the first women to destroy a government aircraft, she was sure that her career was over.
I went back to my quarters, and I just sat there, and I thought, oh, this is it, start packing. And all of a sudden, I heard my name on the loudspeaker system. Lorraine Zillner, report to the flight line. And I thought, oh. So I went down the flight line. There's my instructor sitting there. And he said, come on, we're going up.
Zillner put on her misfit flight suit and climbed into the cockpit. An investigation showed that someone had cut her plane's control cables, attempting to kill her for the high crime of being a female pilot. The saboteur was never found. But that day, it didn't much matter. She was back in the air, flying, and the pilots around her, male and female, understood that what was more important to her than anything else was to get back up into the clear Texas sky. If back in Washington there was still debate about whether it was proper for women to fly, in Sweetwater, Texas, it was clear that Zillner had earned her wings. General Hap Arnold himself pinned Lorraine Zillner's pilot's wings on her. The graduation ceremony at Sweetwater was bittersweet. The WASP had succeeded in learning to fly the military way, but now they were going to be scattered out around the country to more than 100 different bases. The Army Air Force assigned Zillner to the 5th Ferrying Group at Love Field in Dallas. The war was raging around the world, and newly manufactured aircraft were desperately needed at all theaters, so the work was unrelenting.
We would pick up our orders in the morning at our squadron commander would give to us, and we would, by ourselves, just take off and go to whatever factory the plane was coming from. And we would get there, and as the plane came off the assembly line, we would take it up and test it and put it through its paces, and if everything was all right, which obviously it was, we would take it down and accept it for the Army Air Forces, the Corps, and ferry it to its destination, which was either a base where they were training or to its point of embarkation.
Zillner traveled all over the country, flying all kinds of aircraft. She and the other WASP worked 7 days a week for weeks on end, always either flying or in transit to fly. And everywhere they went, they faced the same surprised looks.
In those days, we'd hop out of planes and the crewmen would come up and we'd take off our helmets and down would come this long hair. They'd stand there. They didn't know whether to talk to us or call for the MPs.
There was a certain amount of animosity between the male pilots and the women of the WASP. We were not as enlightened as a society as we are today, and a lot of the men, A, felt threatened by the concept of a woman who might be as good or better in the cockpit, and B, of course, a lot of them felt that women simply weren't competent to be doing that kind of work.
As the WASP got more ingrained in the Air Force, two things happened. On the flight lines, they earned a grudging respect. They were, after all, muscling heavy, difficult-to-fly aircraft around the country without apparent difficulty. But back in Washington, their success seemed to create more rather than less controversy. Jackie Cochran's insistence that the WASP be treated as military pilots rankled many of the powerful men who controlled the military's purse strings. As Cochran pushed harder and harder to get the WASP the same standing that male pilots had, the politics of the situation grew more starkly divided. They flew the same non-combat missions as male pilots, not only ferrying planes, but also pulling live-fire targets through the air, a mission almost as dangerous as combat itself. They helped train bombardiers and other flight crew members, and they died at the same rate as their male counterparts while pushing badly needed aircraft through bad weather to where they were needed. Their dedication never came under question, but they were nonetheless paid less than men doing the same job and had no access to military life insurance. They weren't eligible for promotion, which meant that their $250 a month salary would never rise. Congress, in a fit of pique, even banned the WASP from flying outside the boundaries of the United States, which meant they couldn't ferry planes overseas, or even to and from factories and bases in Canada. In June 1944, Congress considered a bill that would have made the WASP full-fledged members of the United States Army. During the debate, one representative pointed out that the WASP had exceeded the expectations of even their most fervent proponents, that their service was remarkable by any standard. Congress remained unmoved and voted not to give the WASP full military status.
38 of our women were killed. And, when their remains were sent home and buried at their family's expense. We went to Texas at our own expense. Their burials were at their family's expense, and the families couldn't even hang a star, the gold star, in their window. And it wasn't even at the funeral, no military honors, nothing, no recognition at all.
After months of ferrying aircraft, a badly burned-out Zillner was transferred to Waco Army Base, a basic flight school for male cadets. For the next few months, she flew as a maintenance test pilot, making sure that planes that had been repaired were safe enough for the men to fly. She was there late in 1944 when the Army Air Force brought the WASP experiment to an end. The WASP were mustered out of an Air Force they had never really been in. Not unexpectedly, they paid their own way home. Zillner returned to Chicago and got a job in the operations department at Glenview Naval Air Station. There, she met her husband, Captain George Rogers, a Navy fighter who had returned from the war wounded. They married, had 4 children, and for the next 30 years, she followed his career, moving from place to place as the Navy assigned him to different air groups. And all during that time, there were quiet efforts being made to get the WASP recognized as having been part of the Air Force. As the drumbeat built, it became clear that it was not coming from just the WASP themselves. The generation of women behind them, many of whom had sought careers in both civil and military aviation, wanted the WASP to get their due. At public appearances, reunions, and civic functions, Lorraine Zillner Rogers and the other WASP found themselves on the receiving end of unsolicited standing ovations. In 1977, Senator Barry Goldwater introduced into Congress a bill that would recognize the WASP as having been a real part of the Allied victory in World War II. The bill gave the WASP honorable discharges from the Army Air Force, granted them the full status and benefits afforded other military veterans, and recognized that their actions in wartime had been courageous and determined.
We were the first women pilots to fly military aircraft. And as a result, we opened the doors for today's women military pilots, women airline pilots, women corporate pilots, women astronauts. We opened the doors for them. And every time we come in contact with any of them, they always say, thank you.
From her earliest days, she terrified those around her by seeking adventure and excitement. As a girl, she was a real-life Pippi Longstocking, building a roller coaster in her backyard and riding a sled through the legs of a passing horse. She believed that women could accomplish anything if just given the chance, and she sought her own fulfillment in aviation. She became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, first as a passenger, then as a pilot. She was the first person to fly across the Pacific, broke a dozen different speed records, and became the most famous woman of her time. In 1937, on a highly publicized flight around the world, she disappeared without a trace. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to her. She is Amelia Earhart, and she is a legend of air power. Amelia Earhart was born in Atchison, Kansas on July 24, 1897. Her father, Edwin, was a charming alcoholic lawyer whose career was on a downward trajectory. Her mother, Amy, was the prim daughter of a wealthy and socially prominent Kansas family. Amelia was raised primarily in her grandparents' home in Atchison. As a young girl, she defied the norms of female behavior. She climbed trees, hunted rats with her .22 caliber rifle, and rode her sled head first downhill.
She loved boys' games. When she went to school, she learned how to play basketball and baseball, and then she taught all her girlfriends. They played all the boys' games. She was like the Pied Piper. Whatever she did, all the other kids wanted to do also.
When Amelia was 12, she and her sister went to live with her parents in Des Moines. The family was stable for only a few years before the railroad for which her father worked demoted him and transferred him to St. Paul, Minnesota. That move didn't solve any of Edwin's problems. In 1914, unemployed and desperate, he moved his family to Springfield, Illinois, where he abandoned them. Amelia, her mother, and sister Muriel moved to Chicago. At Hyde Park High School, Amelia was a loner, a pretty girl who seemed to distrust the motives of those around her. She was embarrassed by her family's financial condition and embittered by her father's abandonment. In her high school yearbook, she is described as A.E., the girl in brown who walks alone. After she graduated, an inheritance from her grandmother allowed her to attend the exclusive Organt School in Philadelphia. On a Christmas visit to Toronto in 1917, she encountered a group of wounded soldiers returning from the war in Europe. She was nearly undone by the suffering she saw, young men rendered helpless by tuberculosis and mustard gas. The encounter changed her life. She enlisted as a volunteer nurse's aide at the Spadina Military Hospital in Toronto and spent the next year tending to the needs of the most desperately wounded. In Toronto, she also had her first real encounters with aviation. Many of the wounded she cared for were pilots, and they regaled the pretty young nurse's aide with stories of their exploits in the sky. On a walk through the countryside with a friend, she watched a group of planes flying overhead, and one of the pilots dived down in an attempt to scare her. Amelia's friend dove for cover, but Amelia stood fast as the plane passed only a few feet over her head. After growing ill herself, she joined her mother and sister in Northampton, Massachusetts, where Muriel was preparing to attend Smith College. Amelia, pursuing her own interest without regard for what anyone else thought, took class in auto mechanics before enrolling in Columbia University in New York. A pre-med major, she was determined to be a doctor, no matter how much everyone else thought she should do the ladylike thing and become a nurse. In 1919, her parents reconciled and moved to California. Amelia left Columbia to visit with them, hopeful that her family would at long last stabilize. On Christmas Day, 1919, her father took her out to Glendale Airport for a ride in a Curtiss Jenny. It was his Christmas present to her.
And she got in the airplane and took the ride, and records later that as soon as she did that, she was absolutely convinced that this was the outlet that she'd been looking for all of her life.
The girl who had always enjoyed climbing high and taking risks, who could never go fast enough or have enough of an adventure, didn't return to college. She announced to her parents, "I think I'd like to fly," and went looking for a job to pay for flying lessons. For the next year, she worked as a file clerk, an office assistant, a photographer, and a truck driver. She searched for and found a female flight instructor, convinced that she would learn faster if taught by a woman. She eventually signed up to take lessons from Nita Snook, one of the first female pilots in the country.
They were about the same age, and they had pretty much the same background, and they both gone to college, and they were fast friends for a while. But actually, Netta thought that Amelia took too many risks, and she thought she was foolhardy.
On December 15, 1921, Amelia Earhart passed her pilot's test and was issued her very first license to fly. Her mother and sister helped her buy her first airplane, a Kinner Airster that her flight instructor, Nita, thought was too dangerous to fly. But Earhart could not be dissuaded, and for the next 3 years, she flew every chance she got. As the roaring 20s roared around her, Earhart got her kicks taking chances in the air over Southern California.
Now, being a female aviator wasn't exactly acceptable at that time, but it was more acceptable than grabbing hold of the jazz age and becoming one of the flaming youth and drowning in bathtub gin, which was something that her Victorian upbringing simply would not allow.
So she flew, developing a reputation as a pilot that bordered on the irresponsible. She buzzed her friends on the ground, turned terrifying spirals through the air over Los Angeles, and even flew her plane between telephone wires for the sheer exhilaration of taking a risk. And it didn't seem to matter who disapproved of her actions. She went right ahead and did what she felt like doing. After learning to fly, Amelia Earhart spent 2 years in Southern California doing nothing but flying. In 1922, she got her first taste of fame when she set the unofficial women's altitude record, flying her plane up to over 14,000 feet. The brief flurry of recognition quickly settled, and she went back to being just another pilot. In 1924, her parents separated again. The sinus infections that had bothered her since her time in Toronto returned, and she was hospitalized. Depressed at once again being torn between the life she was expected to lead and the one she wanted, she sold her planes to pay off her debts. She bought a car and drove with her mother to Boston, where her sister was in school. Unbeknownst to anyone else, Amelia brought with her a file of newspaper articles she had collected. The collection featured article after article on women who had broken out of their traditional roles to become doctors, lawyers, and even champion sharpshooters. Earhart returned to Columbia for a year, but couldn't afford to continue. She returned to Boston and took a job teaching immigrant children, and then became a social worker at a settlement house. She started flying again as a sales representative for Wilfred Kinner, who had built the plane she'd owned in California. She joined the local chapter of the National Aeronautics Association and began to correspond with noted women aviators about forming an organization for women who flew. In 1928, she came to the attention of George Putnam. Putnam of the Putnam & Sons publishing family was the aviation dilettante who had published Charles Lindbergh's account of his transatlantic flight. The blizzard of attention Lindbergh's flight had generated changed Putnam's life. A fierce competitor and opportunist, he grasped instantly aviation's potential for generating fame and fortune. He instantly repositioned himself as the publicist to aviation stars and adventurers of all types. It has been said of generals that they are always preparing to fight the last war. The same thing can well be said of publicists like Putnam. They're always preparing to recreate the last craze. When the first planned transatlantic flight by a woman fell through, Putnam took the project over. He contacted Amy Guest, the wealthy heiress who had originally planned to make the flight. He convinced her to let him use the Fokker F-7 she had purchased and outfitted if he could find a suitable female to make the flight.
Actually, it was his representative that found Amelia Earhart in Boston, was just absolutely bowled over by her. And then when George Palmer Putnam met her, he was bowled over by her too. And then the Guest family were equally impressed, so nobody but Amelia Earhart was ever interviewed.
Putnam plugged Earhart into the flight that had been planned for Guest. Attracted by her tomboyish good looks, thin figure, and modest Midwestern demeanor, he envisioned her as a female version of Charles Lindbergh. He christened her Lady Lindy and prepared to recreate the publicity blitz he'd put together for Lindbergh. Initially put off by Putnam, Earhart could not turn down a hard offer to be the first woman to fly the Atlantic. She said at the time, "How could I refuse such a shining adventure?" and left, once and for all, the quiet life of a children's social worker behind her. On the 5th anniversary of Lindbergh's New York to Paris flight, Earhart and co-pilots Wilmer Stutz and Lewis Gordon climbed into the Fokker, which had been named the Friendship. They took off from an airfield in Newfoundland, bound for Great Britain. The adventure was not perhaps as shining as she envisioned. Nominally the captain of the flight, Earhart was in fact little more than a passenger. She sat quietly in the cockpit while Stutz and Gordon did the flying. More than 20 hours after takeoff, the Friendship landed in Berryport, Wales. Putnam had done his job well. The flight made headlines all over the world, and those headlines barely mentioned the two men who had done most of the flying. Instead, they focused almost exclusively on Amelia Earhart.
He essentially created her from the ground up in terms of her promotional self, which was far different than the very quiet and introspective Amelia that her friends knew. And many people were not comfortable with their relationship and with the way that he appeared to exploit her.
Exploited or not, Earhart went along willingly. Though she abhorred being referred to as Lady Lindy, she also recognized that Putnam's stunts enabled her to pursue aviation full-time. He published a quickie memoir of her transatlantic flight that became a bestseller. He got her a job as aviation editor of Cosmopolitan, a magazine that had not shown previous interest in aeronautics. She became the first woman to fly coast to coast across the United States. She bought a Lockheed Vega and used it in air races all over the country. She competed in the first Women's Air Derby, a race from Santa Monica, California to Cleveland, Ohio, and came in third. She set the world women's airspeed record of 181 miles an hour. She signed deals with advertisers, designed a line of luggage, and endorsed a line of women's clothing. She became a sought-after speaker and attraction at air shows. At the same time, she worked diligently to attract women to aviation. She organized and served as president of the 99s, an organization of female pilots that exists to this day.
She proved that women could fly, and she did the things that many men were doing. So in that respect, she had a very important impact on what became the United States Air Force, because she proved that women could do this too. And it was harder to say, no, women can't fly, but all you had to do was bring out a picture of Amelia Earhart, and everyone knew who she was.
The young woman who had secretly accumulated a file full of articles about women doing things that only men were supposed to do became an inspiration for the generation of girls who grew up to invent the women's movement. She turned Putnam's publicity machine into one of the driving forces for the growth of aviation, particularly among women. And then, in 1931, she did something that shocked the world. She married Putnam, the man who had given her career wings. When Amelia Earhart and George Putnam first met, she was engaged and he was married. 3 years later, when Earhart and Putnam cast off their previous entanglements to marry each other, there was considerable speculation about the nature of their relationship. Their marriage seemed to many based more on business than emotion. The marriage didn't slow down Earhart's aviation career. 2 months after their wedding, Earhart bought an autogyro, a type of aircraft that never moved out of the novelty category, and went to work setting records in it. She went higher than anyone ever had before, and flew the autogyro cross-country under the sponsorship of the Beechnut Company. She wrote another book, and then flew solo across the Atlantic Ocean, making up for the fact that on her highly publicized first flight, she had not really flown at all. Putnam put together publishing and endorsement deals, and Earhart flew the missions. She set and then broke the coast-to-coast speed record for women. She became the first person to fly from Hawaii to the mainland, a flight hyped by Putnam as the first flight across the Pacific, though it covered less than half the ocean's diameter. She won 3 consecutive Harmon trophies as the outstanding female aviator, and President Herbert Hoover presented her with the gold medal of the National Geographic Society. She flew solo from Los Angeles to Mexico City at the invitation of the Mexican government, and on the return trip became the first person to fly nonstop from Mexico City to Newark. That a flight from Mexico City to Newark made headlines is tribute to Putnam's skills as a publicist. But what he could not finesse was the fact that Earhart was growing tired. As her activities in support of women had grown more important to her, flying had become less. As a consultant to Purdue University, she had seen co-ed enrollment skyrocket just by her mere presence on campus. A generation of girls that she had inspired was coming of age, and she no longer felt the need to prove herself by flying made-up missions for the newsreel cameras. Together, Earhart and Putnam dreamed up one last headline-grabbing flight for Earhart to finish on. It would be, without question, the greatest achievement of both of their careers. And when it was done, Earhart would settle down and pursue her broader interests. The Purdue Research Foundation chipped in for a new airplane, a brand new Lockheed Electra. The plane, after the round-the-world flight, would come back to Purdue for use by Earhart to do research on various aspects of flight. She took delivery of the craft in July 1936 and went to work planning her flight.
There have been a lot of round-the-world flights, but never at the equator, and basically never been done because everybody was still scared of flying the whole width of the Pacific Ocean. Huge. No plane could make it.
Even with the Electra's oversized fuel tanks, the trip would require pinpoint navigational accuracy. Earhart would have to find tiny islands in the vast ocean and land on them with little fuel to spare, hopscotching across the Pacific with almost no margin for error. In March 1937, she set out round the world. Putnam had the publicity machine wound up to full throttle. When Earhart took off from Oakland, California, the whole world was watching. A few days later, when she set out on the next leg of her journey, she crashed on takeoff.
She claimed to hit a wet spot. People who were watching said the wing dipped and she ended up ground looping. But whatever happened, she ended up knocking off her landing gear and the plane had to go in for repairs.
Earhart recuperated at her friend Jackie Cochran's ranch in California. When she told the story of the Hawaii crack-up, Cochran and her husband, Floyd Odlum, sat in stony silence.
She said, well, what's wrong? Aren't you guys going to talk me into going back and doing it again? And nobody said a word except Jackie, who said very quietly, I really hope you don't.
Undaunted, on June 1st, Earhart took off from Miami on her redesigned west to east route. Each time she took off and each time she landed, the headlines flashed around the world. She stopped in South America and in Africa, taking the route and legs that were manageable for the airplane and that could be manipulated to generate publicity. She crossed the Middle East, the Asian subcontinent, and the jungles of Southeast Asia. Back home, her husband fueled the publicity fires. The world had never seen anything like this, a 5-week flight around the world with near real-time reporting furnished by ship's telegraphers and the emerging medium of radio. On July 2nd, 1937, Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, took off from the landing strip at Lae, New Guinea, headed for tiny Halland Island. It was, without question, the hardest leg of her journey, a long flight that had to culminate at a speck of land barely 20 feet above sea level and more than 2,500 miles away. It was the last anyone saw of Amelia Earhart, her navigator, and the Lockheed Electra.
Of course, nobody knows for sure what happened. If you were to have asked her friend Jackie Cochran, who claimed to be psychic, she believed that she got a psychic picture of Amelia floating in the ocean with her airplane not too far off Halland Island for about 3 days before she and Noonan and the plane finally sank.
President Roosevelt ordered the largest, most expensive search and rescue operation the world had ever seen. For weeks, Navy ships and aircraft scoured the area around Halland Island, but nothing was ever found of Amelia Earhart. Ever since, different theories have been advanced about what happened. There are those who believe that Earhart was on a secret spy mission, captured and killed by the Japanese as they expanded their empire toward World War II. Others have speculated that Earhart and Noonan were secretly in love, and they spent the rest of their lives together on an idyllic Pacific island. The reality is probably as simple as this: a small error in navigation, a short circuit in a radio receiver, and a journey that, under the best of circumstances, would have ended with only a few minutes of fuel to spare. Somewhere below the blue waters of the Pacific Ocean, Amelia Earhart's final airplane awaits discovery. To this day, there are people who continue to search.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks' Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth, and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.